At midnight, Margaret Whitmore pounded on my door with one demand: remove the medical machine keeping my premature daughter alive or face legal action. She had no idea I was the county sheriff. She also had no idea how far a father would go to protect his dying child. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. Someone was banging hard on my door at almost midnight. My wife Sarah woke up scared. Our baby Emma wasn't in her crib at home. She was in the hospital fighting for her life. She was born way too early and was very sick. David, who is that? Sarah whispered, sounding afraid. I put on my robe and went downstairs. My heart was beating fast. I thought maybe something bad happened to Emma at the hospital. I looked through the peephole and saw Margaret Whitmore. She was the president of our neighborhood association. She was standing at my door with two other people. Even though it was midnight, she was dressed up perfectly with her gray hair pulled back tight. Margaret? What's wrong? I asked when I opened the door. Her cold blue eyes looked angry. Sheriff Morgan, we need to talk about the big truck on your property and the machine in your living room. I was confused. What are you talking about? The medical truck that's been here for 3 hours, she said in a mean voice. And that big medical machine in your living room. Both are against neighborhood rules. Then I understood. She was talking about Emma's incubator, the special machine that would keep our tiny baby safe during the trip to the children's hospital tomorrow morning. The machine cost $80,000 and could save Emma's life. Margaret, I said, trying to stay calm, that machine is for my daughter. She was born 3 months too early. She weighs only 2 pounds. Without that machine she could die. Margaret's face didn't change. She didn't care at all. I'm sorry about your problem, Sheriff, but personal issues don't change neighborhood rules. No commercial trucks can stay on residential streets between 6 p.m. and 8 a.m. Also, no big machines can be stored in homes where people can see them from the street. Sarah came downstairs in her bathrobe. Her face looked tired and scared. Mrs. Whitmore, our baby is in intensive care. This machine will save her life. Mrs. Morgan, Margaret said coldly, I understand you're upset, but rules exist for everyone's good. Property values in our neighborhood are very high because we have standards. I felt anger building inside me. I had been a sheriff for 20 years and learned to control my temper. But this woman was threatening my dying daughter over property values. The machine stays, I said firmly. We're moving Emma at 6 a.m. It will be gone by 8 a.m. Margaret's face got tight with anger. That's not acceptable. We already got 7 complaints from neighbors about how bad it looks. The board had an emergency meeting an hour ago. We all voted, the machine must go right now. Harold Klein, one of the other people with her, spoke up nervously. Margaret, maybe we could make an exception just this once? Because of the situation. She turned on him angrily. Harold, we talked about this. If we start making exceptions, our whole system falls apart. Today it's medical equipment, tomorrow it's boats and RVs and who knows what else. We're talking about a baby's life. Sarah cried with tears running down her face. We're talking about property values and neighborhood standards, Margaret shot back. Your personal crisis doesn't give you the right to ignore rules that affect everyone. I stepped closer to her, using my height to look down at her. Margaret, I'm going to say this once. That machine stays exactly where it is. My daughter's life depends on it. Her eyes flashed with challenge. Are you threatening me, Sheriff? Because I'll remind you that neighborhood association rules are more important than personal wants, even for police officers. I'm not threatening you, I said quietly, using the calm voice I used with dangerous criminals. I'm telling you, touch that machine or mess with it in any way, and I'll arrest you for putting a child in danger. Margaret actually smiled, a cold, mean smile. You can't scare me with your badge, David. Neighborhood rules are legal contracts. We have every right to enforce them. She turned to Harold. Show him the papers. Harold pulled out some legal papers. This is an order to remove all forbidden items right away. If you don't do it within 1 hour, we'll start charging you $500 every day, and we'll take you to court. I grabbed the papers and read them in shock. They were actually trying to force me to remove life-saving equipment from my home while my daughter was dying in the hospital. You people are crazy, I said. This is a medical emergency. This is a property issue, Margaret corrected. One that should have been handled properly from the start. You should have asked for permission before having any medical equipment delivered. Permission. I exploded. My daughter was born 3 months early. She almost died twice this week. I'm supposed to fill out paperwork with the neighborhood association before trying to save her life. Patricia Webb, the third person with Margaret, finally spoke up. Margaret, maybe we should think about this again. This seems very harsh given the situation. Patricia? Margaret snapped. We already voted. The decision is final. Margaret turned back to me with satisfaction. You have 1 hour, Sheriff. After that, we'll be back with legal permission to remove the equipment ourselves. As they walked away, Margaret called over her shoulder, And David? Your badge doesn't make you special. Rules apply to everyone the same. I stood in my doorway, shaking with anger, watching them disappear into the darkness. Sarah fell against me, crying. They can't do this, she whispered. They can't take away Emma's chance. But I knew Margaret Whitmore. She could do this and she would. The next few hours were terrible. I made lots of phone calls. I called our lawyer, who said neighborhood association rules were legal contracts. I called the hospital, who said they couldn't move Emma's transport earlier, she was too sick. I called the medical equipment company, who said there was nowhere else to put the incubator overnight. Every option was blocked. At 3 a.m. I called my brother Mike, who was also a police officer in the next county. Mike, I need advice. Margaret Whitmore is trying to force me to remove Emma's life support equipment. She's what? Mike's voice was full of disbelief. David, that woman has always been crazy, but this is insane. Can you charge her with something? I'm thinking about it. But if I arrest the HOA president without solid evidence, it could look like abuse of power. Solid evidence? She's threatening to kill your daughter over parking violations. Mike was right, but I had to be careful. Margaret was looking for any excuse to claim I was using my badge inappropriately. At 4 a.m., I sat in my living room looking at the incubator that would carry my daughter to safety in just 2 hours. The machine made quiet humming sounds, with lights showing numbers I didn't understand but knew were important for Emma's survival. Sarah slept fitfully on the couch next to me, exhausted from weeks of stress and no sleep. Every few minutes, she'd wake up and check her phone for news from the hospital. I thought about Emma lying in her tiny hospital bed, fighting for every breath. She had already survived so much: premature birth, lung problems, feeding difficulties. Now she had to survive Margaret Whitmore's obsession with property values. At 4:47 a.m., headlights shone through our windows. I looked out and saw Margaret's silver car pulling into our driveway, followed by a big truck with Klein Legal Services painted on it. My blood went cold. I woke Sarah gently. They're back. Her eyes went wide with fear. It's too early. The transport truck isn't here yet. Margaret got out of her car wearing a business suit even though it was so early. Harold Klein got out of the truck looking sick and guilty. Behind them came 2 big men in work clothes carrying tools. They marched up to our door like soldiers preparing for battle. Sheriff Morgan, Margaret announced when I opened the door, you've had over 4 hours to follow neighborhood rules. Since you chose to ignore our legal order, we're here to enforce it. You're not coming in my house, I said, blocking the doorway. Actually, we are. She held up more papers. Emergency enforcement order. We have legal permission to remove forbidden items from neighborhood properties. One of the big men stepped forward. Sheriff, we don't want trouble. We're just here to move some equipment. That equipment is keeping my daughter alive. I shouted. Margaret's voice was like ice. That equipment violates neighborhood standards. It should never have been brought here. Where exactly do you think I should put a medical incubator that needs constant power and temperature control? That's not our problem, she replied coldly. You should have made arrangements that follow neighborhood rules. Sarah appeared behind me, still in her pajamas. Please, she begged Margaret. Our baby could die. She's so tiny, so weak. This machine is all that stands between her and death. Mrs. Morgan, Margaret interrupted, trying to make me feel bad won't work. I've heard every sad story you can imagine from homeowners trying to avoid their responsibilities. The casual cruelty in her voice was shocking. She was comparing our dying daughter to someone trying to avoid a fine for a messy lawn. You're talking about a human baby? I said, my voice getting dangerous. A 2-pound baby who has already fought for her life for 3 weeks. I'm talking about property regulations that everyone must follow, Margaret replied. No exceptions. At that moment I understood true hatred. Get off my property, I said quietly, my voice deadly serious. Margaret smiled that same cold smile. I'm afraid we're not leaving without that equipment. She nodded to the 2 men who started toward the door with their tools. That's when I pulled out my gun. Nobody enters this house, I said, my voice steady despite the rage burning inside me. This is my home, and that equipment is protecting my daughter's life. The 2 workers immediately stepped back with their hands up. Harold Klein went pale as paper. Even Margaret looked scared for the first time. David, Harold said nervously, let's all calm down. Maybe we can work something out. The time for working things out was at midnight when I explained that my daughter's life was at stake, I replied, keeping my gun pointed at the group. Instead, you chose to care more about property values than a baby's survival. Margaret recovered quickly. Sheriff, you're pointing a gun at civilians. That's assault with a deadly weapon. I'm defending my home and family from people threatening to destroy life-saving medical equipment, I corrected. Any reasonable person would call that justified. Put the gun away, David, Margaret said in a talking-down voice. You're being irrational. This is about following rules, not hurting anyone. You want to remove equipment that's keeping my daughter alive, and I'm being irrational? Rules exist for everyone's benefit, Margaret continued. If we let you break them, what happens when everyone else wants exceptions? What happens when you let a baby die for property values? I shot back. At that moment, more headlights filled our driveway. The medical transport team had arrived early. Dr. Phillips jumped out of the ambulance, looked at the standoff on my porch, and immediately understood what was happening. What the hell is going on here? He demanded, walking toward us with medical authority. Margaret turned to him with her fake smile. Doctor, we're simply enforcing property rules. This equipment needs to be removed. Dr. Phillips stared at her in disbelief. Lady, that equipment is keeping a premature baby alive. Are you completely insane? I'm enforcing legally binding rules, Margaret replied stiffly. You're interfering with medical care, Dr. Phillips shot back. If anything happens to that baby because of your actions, I'll personally make sure you're charged with killing a child through negligence. Margaret's face turned red with anger. Don't you dare threaten me. I'm within my legal rights. Your legal rights don't include killing babies. Dr. Phillips roared. Two paramedics approached with a gurney, preparing to transport Emma from the hospital to our house, then to the children's hospital. The carefully planned timing was being destroyed by Margaret's obsession with rules. Dr. Phillips pulled out his phone. I'm calling the hospital. We need police backup for medical emergency interference. I am the police, I said, still holding my gun on Margaret's group. Then arrest these idiots for putting a child in danger. Margaret's composure finally broke. How dare you? I'm trying to maintain neighborhood standards while everyone else ignores the rules. If we let one person break rules, what's to stop everyone from doing whatever they want? Basic human decency? Dr. Phillips suggested sarcastically. Compassion for a dying baby? Sarah added through her tears. Rules exist for a reason. Margaret screamed, her carefully maintained act completely gone. Property values. Neighborhood standards. Order. Without rules we have chaos. Without compassion we have monsters, I replied quietly. That's when she completely lost control. Fine, she shrieked. You want to ignore the rules? You want to pretend your personal crisis makes you special? We'll see about that. She lunged toward the house, clearly planning to force her way inside and unplug the incubator herself. I couldn't shoot a civilian, even one as evil as Margaret Whitmore. Instead, I put away my gun and tackled her, bringing her down hard on the porch steps. You're under arrest for attempted destruction of medical equipment and reckless endangerment of a child, I said, pulling out my handcuffs. Margaret fought wildly beneath me, screaming about rules and property values and her rights as neighborhood president. Dr. Phillips supervised as the paramedics quickly wheeled the incubator toward the ambulance. Every second mattered now. Emma's transport window was closing fast. As I handcuffed Margaret, she looked up at me with pure hatred. I'll destroy you for this, she hissed. I'll have your badge, your pension, everything. You'll regret the day you crossed Margaret Whitmore. The only thing I regret, I replied, is that it took me this long to arrest you. Harold Klein stood frozen in shock as I read Margaret her rights. The two workers had run away the moment I pulled out my gun. Harold, I called out, you're also under arrest for aiding and abetting. Wait, he protested. I tried to talk her out of this. I said we should make an exception. Yet you're here at 5 a.m. trying to remove life-saving equipment from a baby. I loaded Margaret and Harold into my police car. Margaret continued screaming from the back seat about lawsuits and rights violations, but her voice faded as we drove toward the county jail. The transport went perfectly. Emma arrived at the children's hospital stable and was immediately moved to their advanced neonatal unit. Over the following weeks, she grew stronger, gaining weight and developing the strength she'd need to survive and thrive. Margaret Whitmore's legal troubles were just beginning. The story of a neighborhood association president trying to remove life-saving equipment from a premature baby spread like wildfire. Local news picked it up first, then regional outlets, then national television. The headline HOA Karen nearly kills baby over rule violation appeared in newspapers across the country. Public outrage was swift and brutal. Margaret's personal information was leaked online, leading to thousands of angry calls and emails. Protesters gathered outside her house every day with signs reading "Baby Killer" and "Rules Over Lives." The neighborhood association board held an emergency meeting and unanimously voted to remove Margaret as president. Several members resigned in shame for having supported her actions. The trial was a media circus. Every major news outlet covered the case of the HOA president who tried to kill a baby over property values. During her trial, the prosecution presented evidence of Margaret's long history of neighborhood association abuse, elderly residents fined for minor violations, disabled homeowners penalized for medical equipment, young families harassed over trivial infractions. When Margaret took the stand in her own defense, she sealed her fate. "I was simply doing my job," she testified. "Rules exist to maintain property values and neighborhood standards. If we make exceptions for one person, where does it end?" The prosecutor leaned forward. "Mrs. Whitmore, are you saying property values are more important than a baby's life?" Margaret's answer shocked the packed courtroom. "I'm saying rules apply equally to everyone regardless of their personal circumstances. Even when those circumstances involve a dying child?" "Especially then," Margaret replied coldly. "The moment we start making emotional exceptions, our entire system collapses." The jury took less than 2 hours to find her guilty on all charges. Judge Harrison looked at Margaret with disgust before sentencing. "Mrs. Whitmore, in 40 years on this bench, I have rarely seen such callous disregard for human life. You were willing to let a baby die to enforce a parking regulation." He sentenced her to 3 years in prison, 5 years probation, community service at the Children's Hospital, and ordered her to pay all of Emma's medical expenses, over $200,000. But Margaret's punishment extended far beyond the legal system. Her husband divorced her while she was in prison, saying he couldn't be married to someone who would endanger a baby. Her adult children cut off contact, ashamed of their mother's actions. She lost her job, her house, and most of her friends. The neighborhood association dissolved entirely, with residents voting to eliminate all restrictive covenants except basic maintenance requirements. Meanwhile, Emma continued to grow stronger. After 2 months in the neonatal intensive care unit, she was finally healthy enough to come home. At 5 pounds she was still small, but her future looked bright. The day we brought Emma home, our entire neighborhood turned out to welcome her. The oppressive atmosphere Margaret had created was gone, replaced by genuine community spirit. Mrs. Patterson from next door brought homemade baby blankets. The Johnsons offered to help with night feedings. Even gruff old Mr. Garcia smiled as he looked at Emma's tiny face. "This little one brought us all together," Sarah whispered as we stood on our porch, surrounded by neighbors who had become friends. As Emma grew, the story of her early fight for life became part of our community's identity. Every year on her birthday, neighbors gathered to celebrate not just her life, but the reminder that human compassion matters more than any rule or regulation. Margaret served 18 months before being released on good behavior. She moved to another state where no one knew her story. Sometimes I wondered if she ever truly understood what she had done, or if she still believed she was right to enforce those rules. But I didn't waste much time thinking about her. I was too busy watching Emma take her first steps, say her first words, and grow into the miracle she had always been. Every milestone was a victory, every smile a reminder of how precious life truly is. Years later, when Emma was old enough to understand, I told her the story of her difficult beginning. She listened carefully, then looked up at me with serious eyes. "Daddy, why did that lady want to hurt me?" I thought carefully before answering. "She didn't see you as a person who needed help. She only saw rules that needed to be followed. But sometimes, sweetheart, the most important rule is to be kind and help people when they need it most." Emma nodded solemnly. "I'm going to remember that." And I knew she would. Because sometimes the greatest victories come from the deepest struggles, and the most important lessons emerge from the darkest moments. Margaret Whitmore thought she was enforcing order, but she only created chaos. She thought she was protecting property values, but she nearly destroyed something infinitely more valuable, a child's life. In trying to prove that rules mattered more than people, she only proved the opposite. And in the end, that made all the difference.